Well, hello there. Welcome back to our study in the book of Job. This program is brought to you each Wednesday night at 7 o'clock p.m. by the Port Huron Church of Christ, located at 756 17th Street, right here in the city of Port Huron. Hey, have you been with us for this entire trip, this journey we're on? We want you to know we really appreciate you joining us and hanging in there with us. We hope that you're reading and you're studying and digesting Job, and by now our prayer is that you're beginning to see some things in the book maybe that you haven't seen before, and considering some of the arguments, things about the arguments that you haven't thought of, and maybe even found that you have agreed with some of the things that Job and his friends have said. Now remember, up until this point, everything that they've said in God's eyes has been incorrect, and he's going to correct that. But I want to encourage you to stick with us. We're halfway through, and we still have a little ways to go, but it's heating up. It's really getting interesting now, and I want to just say this. It's going to be good, y'all, because the best is yet to come. That's right. The crescendo is building, and the best part of the book is on its way, so hang in there with us. And for you that have just joined us for the very first time, hey, welcome aboard. We're taking this journey through Job. As I said, we're only halfway through, so there's still plenty of time to catch up to us. There's still plenty for you to glean from this study. So we're hope, trust, and prayers that you'll stay with us the rest of the way. And as we have established last week, if you have questions for us, this is our email address, office@porthuronchurchofchrist.org. Please direct your questions there. All you have to do is put in the, just tell us that it's for Job, and then whatever your question is, we will answer it on the air. We appreciate the questions. We appreciate you being with us. And now let us look into the book of Job. As we open up in chapter 20, Job has responded now to Bildad, and Zophar is our next speaker. Zophar doesn't like what he's heard from Job. In fact, he said in verse 2 that he is disturbed by the things that he has heard. And in verse 3, he says that he heard this rebuke that dishonors him as well as his understanding. And now he is inspired to speak, as you might think. And as I mentioned, Zophar is very angry at Job for what he has been saying. As Zophar continues his arguments against Job, he continues to add to his statement that the days of the wicked are short and they will be punished. Keep in mind, all of this is a reference to Job. So whenever Zophar mentions the wicked, he's actually talking about Job. I just want you to keep that in mind. And he says, do you not know this of old? Zophar did what he and his friends had done on previous occasions. He made a claim to authority simply by saying, we all know these things to be true, without ever proving the claim. You've heard people make insinuations. That's what they're doing. They have something that they grabbed onto, insinuating that everybody knows this to be true, even though they've never proved that claim. Zophar had a strong conceit that Job was a hypocrite. And that's what his point is going to be that he's going to make in chapter 20. He keeps calling Job a hypocrite, one that was wicked before God. Here it is. In heart, although he expressed his fair shake of fake professions of piety. So he's saying, Job, look, your whole piety act was just that and that. You're not really the person you think you are, or the person you're pretending to be. You're a fake. You're a phony, Job. You're a hypocrite. And in verse 5, he talks about the triumphing of the wicked is short, and the joy of the hypocrite is but for a moment. Job, we all know this, that whatever good or triumph the wicked seem to enjoy, it is all quickly passing. It is only for a moment, and then the wicked man will perish forever like his own refuge. Gosh, what a horrible statement he makes. And we're going to read some of this from Zophar. Why don't we go back and read a little bit and then catch up, and then I'll come back to this. And he began by saying, then Zophar the Naamathite replied, my troubled thoughts prompt me to answer because I am greatly disturbed. I hear a rebuke that dishonors me, and my understanding inspires me to reply. Surely you know how it has been been of old, ever since mankind was placed on earth, that the mirth of the wicked is brief, the joy of the godless lasts for a moment. And then he says, though the pride of the godless person reaches to the heavens and head touches the clouds, he will perish forever like his own dung. Those who have seen him will say, where is he? And like a dream, he flies away, no more to be found, banished like a vision of the night. The eye that saw him will not see him again. His place will look on him no more. And so I want to just continue this thought that I had of Zophar, because in making this statement, he's saying to Job, whatever good or triumph the wicked seem to enjoy, it is all quickly passing. It is only for a moment, and then the wicked man will perish forever. Yet, Zophar here hints, and this is the point that he's trying to make, he hints his disbelief in that doctrine of the resurrection of the body, which Job had just talked about and in the preceding chapter. So let's go ahead and look at now his statement. He continues in verse 6 that the pride of the godless person gives him what he would call the big head. That's right. That's what he's saying to Job. Job, you have the big head, but in time, according to Zophar, in verse number 7, he will perish forever like his own dung. His friends will ask him, where is he? And he will be gone like a dream or a vision at night. He's saying, Job, what is happening to you is happening because you have done this, and you, because you're wicked, you are perishing. And rightly so, when we established last week that if you looked at Job, you get the feeling that Job is dying. He's just shriveling to nothing but a shadow of his former self. And it continues, and finally one day, according to verse 7, his youthful vigor lie in the dust with him, with his evil still in his heart, because he refuses to let it go. And that's what he is trying to tell Job. And the point that they've been trying to drive into Job's mind is, Job, whatever you've done to God, whatever evil is in your heart, repent and let God restore you. But if you don't, you're going to die with this evil still in your heart. Now, in verse number 14 through 16, he says, one day, all of that will change for the wicked. And he's talking about the good that the wicked enjoy, and his earthly riches which he enjoys, God will make his stomach vomit them up. So everything that you think made your life wonderful and just, so great in your eyes, it's going to make you sick. And God's going to make you vomit it up. And no longer will he enjoy the good things. No longer will he enjoy the streams, the rivers flowing with honey and cream. And in verse 19, Zophar goes on to say, he describes what he thought was the sinful conduct of the wicked man and why he deserved to be frustrated in life, clearly in implying that he is talking to Job. All of these comments that he's making now about the wicked man is directed at Job personally. In verses 24 and 25, Zophar saw the wicked man pierced by the arrows of God's judgment. He took the complaint of Job of being pierced by God's arrow himself. If you recall back in the 6th chapter of Job, verse number 4, Job made this statement himself. He said, the arrows of the Almighty are in me. My spirit drinks in their poison. God's terrors are marshaled against me. So Job brought up this point about the arrows of God, and now Zophar is using that against him by saying that's how God treats the wicked. So if you're saying God did that to you, then you must be wicked. Job also said in chapter 7, verses 20, if I have sinned, what have I done to you? You who see everything we do, talking to God, why have you made me your target? Target of what? Target of your arrows. Job's friends did not seem to regard him as a wicked man. If you remember, when they first showed up back in chapter 2, remember what they said back then. I'm going to read that for you in a minute. But their impression of Job has consistently changed throughout this conversation. In verse number 11 of chapter 2, this is how it all began for them. If you recall, it said, when Job's three friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, heard about all the troubles that had come upon him, they set out from their homes and met together by agreement to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. Now that was their purpose. When they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. They began to weep aloud, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and nights. No one said a word to him because they saw how great his suffering was. Now, when we think of this and go back to this picture, it was kind of refreshing to think that here's Job sitting all alone in this condition with these boils all over him, in misery, in pain, and his three friends come to comfort him. And this was their mindset when they first, arrived. They was going to comfort him. They were going to sympathize with him. And then when they saw him, they said, oh boy, we're going to mourn with him. They sat quietly for 7 days and didn't say a word. But look what has happened over time. They have increasingly become harder and harder and harder on Job to get their point across. And now it has escalated from four friends sharing a difficult moment to them actually attacking Job. And it's become now adversarial. So here's the question. Is it possible that Job's thinking or his position or maybe his steadfastness in his belief that he was blameless or he was innocent in all of this, that has driven these friends from being these guys to the guys they are now? And that's quite possible. We can't discount that, because regardless what they have said to Job, Job's feet are planted very solid in the ground, and he has refused to budge an inch. And he has totally disagreed with everything that they have said up to this point. So what has happened now, well, they once had pity on him, and they once had compassion when they arrived. Now they just see him as a stubborn and wicked man. And so now, once they regarded him as this way, their hearts have quickly hardened, and they say all cries and appeals on the part of Job were mere proofs that he refuses to read correctly the universal law as revealed in the experience of life. So Job is ignoring not only what they're telling him, but what all have come to realize. And therefore, their impressions of Job is just growing darker and darker. They're giving up on Job. I want to recap the 3 points that Zophar made in chapter 20. He first argued that the wicked do not live long. And I want you to remember these, because Job is going to address these in chapter 21, and we're going to talk about that as well. He said, the wicked do not live long. He describes the life of those who do not put their faith in God in verses 2 through 11. He said the wicked's triumph has always been brief, and then God intervenes and quickly punishes the evil one. The second thing that he said, that the pleasures of the wicked are temporary. The wicked face an early death. Zophar compared the evildoer's enjoyment of sin to the consumption of food, but eventually it poisons the system. Wrongdoing carries with it both temporary enjoyment and punishment. And if you want one, you got to also take the other. And the third thing he said, that suffering is always the result of God's judgment on the wicked. So Zophar painted a terrifying picture of the judgment and punishment the wicked will receive. And let's recap his words from verses 26 through 29. And I'm going to read those for you now. It said, total darkness lies in wait for his treasures. A fire unfanned will consume him and devour what is left in his tent. Now he's talking about the evil person here. The heavens will expose his guilt. The earth will rise up against him. A flood will carry off his house, rushing waters on the day of God's wrath. Such is the fate God allows the wicked, the heritage appointed for them by God. Now, in his final statement to Job, and I want you to remember now, this is it. Zophar does not come back for the third round. So this is his conclusion. Such is the fate God allots to the wicked. To you, Job, this is your fate. This is your destiny. This is why this is happening to you. The heritage appointed them by God. These closing words were in the nature of a summary of all that he had been saying from the last two times he had spoke. And the sufferings he had described were such as would happen to the wicked, and that by divine appointment these things took place. All of this was true. However, the narrowness of Zophar's philosophy made him unjust in the mind of Job. Because for the most part, if we think about it, Zophar was mostly correct. It is true that there is a moral order to the universe, and that wickedness is inherently unprofitable, and it is cursed and judged by God. I think we would all agree with that. In the passage with passion, Zophar described, and I think this is where you're going to begin to get in trouble, the instability of evil gains. He said, there is triumph, but it is short. We understand that. There's a mounting up, but it's succeeded by a swift vanishing. We get that. And there's a sense of youth, but it becomes dust. We understand that as the cycle of life. There is a sweetness, but it becomes remorse, a swallowing down, which ends in a vomiting up, which is getting, without rejoicing. Now, however, some of this did not necessarily apply to Job's situation. He's speaking these things, but Job said, this really didn't apply to me. So Zophar declared the triumph, of the wicked has always been brief. He suggested that God intervenes quickly to punish evil. Now, what we're going to see is that he uses this metaphor comparing the evildoer's enjoyment of sin to the consumption of food. And according to him, the wicked man enjoys sin the way that one might enjoy a feast. But eventually, that sin poisons his system. Wrongdoing carries with it both temporary enjoyment and punishment. And if you want one, as I said, you have to accept the other. And Zophar said the suffering is always a result of God's judgment of the wicked. So he says, not even the rich man's wealth, and the Bible, Jesus even said this. He said, not even the rich man's wealth and prosperity can keep him from dying. In verse 24, Zophar said, God will chase him down and pierce him with a bronze-tipped arrow. He will be captured and dragged into court, where heaven and earth will testify against him and find him guilty as charged. Complete darkness is held in reserve for the wicked man's treasures. An unfanned fire will devour him. It will consume the survivor of his tent, The heavens will reveal his iniquity, and the earth will rise up against him. The increase of his house will depart. His possessions will flow away in the day of anger. And this is the wicked man's portion from God, even the heritage decreed to him by God, as we read in verses 26 through 29. So before we leave Zophar, I want to make an observation. Zophar, as with the rest of Job's friends, made one serious mistake. And I think it's important that we kind of just pause and drink this in. And this is what I was mentioning earlier when I said that Job found Zophar unjust. These three friends were what we would call legalistic, meaning that they take the rule and say this rule is hard fast. This rule has no give to it. This rule is what it is. It's black and white. You break the rule, this is what you get. So you know what they missed, what Job was trying to say, what Job is thinking, and you got it. Grace. They left no room for grace whatsoever. And what we're saying here and trying to grab is that they felt that there was no way that God could ever get to a place where he would change his viewpoint of a wicked person. Now, I want you to think about that for just a minute and try to understand what I'm saying. I said it that way for a reason. He said, once the wicked man's heart expresses itself, he will never change. There is no repentance possible for him. He's doomed. And God will exercise judgment and punishment on him. Now, we know from our lives that that's not true, because you and I began our journey in Christ as sinners who repented and now are children of God because of God's grace. So there is where they are really off base. Now, granted, back there in this time frame we're talking about, Jesus hadn't died on a cross. We haven't even gotten close to that. And grace and mercy as we understand it probably wasn't the same thing. But what you're going to find here is that Zophar is actually saying in so many words that his God does not have mercy and grace. The God that he understands, the God that he serves, which is supposed to be the same God that Job is also serving, has no mercy and no grace. And to kind of get ahead of the story just a little bit, we know from peeking at the end that God is going to make a statement to Job. And in that statement, he's going to say, Job, all of your friends, what they said about me was wrong. So within this statement here that Zophar makes about God, he's incorrect. So let's kind of move on now and see what Job has to say back to Zophar. Chapter 21, verse number 1. Then Job replied, listen carefully to my words. Let this be the consolation you give me. He said, bear with me while I speak, and after I have spoken, mock on. Continue making fun of me, continue dogging me out, doing what you're doing. I don't care, but listen to what I have to tell you first. Is my complaint directed to a human being? And the answer is no. He's really directing it to God. Why should I not be impatient? Look at me and be appalled. Clap your hand over your mouth. And when I think about this, he said, I am terrified. Trembling seizes my body. When I think about what has happened to me, when he said, put your hand over your mouth, it's like, look at me. Look at what has happened to me. This isn't the friend that you know. He said, even I'm terrified at what has overtaken me. He said, why do the wicked live on, growing old and increasing in power? They see their children established around them, their offspring before their eyes. Their homes are safe and free from fear. The rod of God is not on them. Their bulls never fail to breed, and their cow calves do not miscarry. They send forth their children as a flock. Their little ones dance about. They sing to the music of the timbrel and the lyre, and they marry to the sound of the pipe. They spend their years in prosperity and go down to the grave in peace. This is what Job is saying as he answers Zophar. Yet they say to God, and he's kind of saying this as a rebuttal to Zophar, but he's also saying this to God because this is the way it feels to him right now. Yet they say to God, leave us alone. We have no desire to know your ways. Now, there is some truth in what Job is saying here about this scene. It's not entirely true, but there's some truth here. And I want you to give thought to why some of this can be true. I just talked about it a minute ago, but you'll get there. In verse number 15, he said, who is the Almighty that we should serve him? What will we gain by praying to him? That's what they say. But their prosperity is not in their own hands. So I stand aloof at the plans of the wicked. Yet how often is the lamp of the wicked snuffed out? How often does calamity come upon them, the fate God allots in his anger? How often are they like straw before the wind, like chaff swept away by a gale? It is said, God stores up the punishment of the wicked for their children. Let him repay the wicked so that they themselves will experience it. Let their own eyes see their destruction. Let them drink the cup of wrath of the Almighty. For what do they care about the families they leave behind when their allotted months come to an end? Can anyone teach knowledge to God since he judges even the highest? One person dies in full vigor, completely secure and at ease, well-nourished in body, bones rich with marrow. Another one dies in bitterness of soul, never having enjoyed anything good. Side by side, they lie in the dust, and worms cover them both. He said, I know full well what you're thinking, the schemes by which you would wrong me. You say, where now is the house of the great, the tents where the wicked lived? Have you never questioned those who travel? Have you paid no regard to their accounts, that the wicked are spared from the day of calamity, that they are delivered from the day of wrath? Who denounces their conduct to their face? Who repays them for what they have done? They are carried to the grave, and watch is kept over their tombs. The soil in the valley is sweet to them. Everyone follows after them, and a countless throng goes before them. And he ends now, so how can you console me with your nonsense? Nothing is left of your answers but falsehood. And to that I say, nothing is left of our time. That's right. Our time for today has expired. I really wanted to get into dissecting a little bit more of what Job was going to respond, or what he did respond to Zophar. And we're going to get into that. We'll start there next week. We'll kind of go back into 21 and we'll talk about some of the points that Job is making here, and point out how he directly responds to some of the accusations made by Zophar. But as I said, our time is up for today. We are so grateful for your presence among us. Thank you for joining us. We'll be right here next week waiting for you with another piece of this beautiful book to think about. And hopefully through our time together and looking at the book of Job, the goal here is so that we all understand God in a greater way, so that we can appreciate him and what we're coming towards is a full trust and confidence in God's wisdom to rule and run the universe. That's what this is really all about. And that's where we're headed. So if you want to see how we get there, be with us next week. Thanks a lot for joining us. We'll see you next week. God bless.